So as Melissa stated, I'm here to talk about effective policy advocacy. So we're going to get started with talking about what exactly a policy is. So the official definition is a high-level overall plan embracing general goals and acceptable procedures, especially in a governmental body. So can anyone give me an example of a type of policy? I know you all have mine outlined, I think, but.
Immigration policy?
Yeah, immigration policy, so that could be a law or regulation. It could be rules, any type of official plan or guidelines. So people who promote or try to influence decision makers to pass these policies are called advocates. So a person who argues for or supports an advocate. Do you think we as lawyers are advocates?
Yes.
Yes. Can anyone provide an example of when they had to advocate for a policy or for their client or something similar? Has anyone gone to court before and tried to prove a certain statute or something applied to their position? Okay, so when in doing so, you were being an advocate. You were advocating for that policy or rule. So policy advocacy encompasses a wide range of activities to influence the decision makers. Decision makers can be judges, elected officials, or agency heads. It can include a wide range of activities. Like I said, it could be people protesting in the street, you appearing before a judge, you going down to city council, talking to your council member, any type of activity that would influence that action. So we talked about going to court. Are there any other decision makers that you all work with or come in contact with in your work? Any elected officials that you all deal with? Yes.
Director of my agency.
Yeah, so agency heads, they do regulations and rules there too, so it's important that you're aware of the proper way, the most effective way to get your point across. Thank you for that. This is just something I found that shows someone speaking to a room of presumably decision makers talking about why her plan should be followed. So that activity is called lobbying, which was the previous slide, and then lobbyists, anyone can be a lobbyist. We can be lobbyists as judges. You work on behalf of a client. The client will employ a lobbyist or hire a lobbyist on a contract basis. They may or may not work with other lobbyists who will go lobby government agencies or other government bodies, legislatures, things like that. So the official definition of lobbying from the Virginia Code is influencing or attempting to influence executive or legislative action through oral or written communications with an executive or legislative official. It also includes solicitations of others to influence that action through the executive or legislative person. So examples of lobbying can include testimony, letters, having a face-to-face meeting, conversations designed to influence the decision maker. If you're out at a function, networking reception, you're talking to someone who has that power to make that change or make that ask in your legislation or rule or regulation, then that act would be lobbying. And for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to focus on legislative action. So in Virginia, there's actually been an update since this outline was prepared. You have to register as a lobbyist. So the definition of a lobbyist from the code is any individual who is employed in any manner or who is reimbursed for expenses or who represents an organization, association, or other group for the purposes of influence or attempting to influence executive or legislative action through that oral or written communication. So when I worked at the ACLU, I was a lobbyist when I appeared before council to testify on various bills to get them to vote in our favor. So the purpose is really just to have an open and responsible government. We pay taxes, we should have that input in what our elected officials do. It provides space for members of the public to express themselves and things like that. So people think it's important that one can be a lobbyist and one can have input in this process. Yes, I hope so. Okay, so registration is required, like I said, in Virginia. It's through the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Advisory Council. So online, there's a really long PowerPoint discussion of detailed instructions of what you have to do to register as a lobbyist. There's a $100 fee per principal that you're representing, and they require disclosures of any funds that were used, specific meetings that you had, and what was discussed. So if you're interested, I'll pass this around, but you also can find it online just by Googling there. So it's very important that as a lobbyist, you take the time and steps to register. And there are cases in the past where big organizations have failed to register and it's caused severe consequences. So I said today we'll be discussing legislative action, and I'll be talking about the DC Council right over the border here. That is our chief legislative body in DC, and I forgot I didn't go in the icebreaker. Again, my name is Melanie. I'm from Herndon. I grew up in Fairfax County area, and one thing that makes me smile is the beach, but I now live in DC. Sorry about that. Okay, so the DC Council, like I said, chief legislative body, they're comprised of 13 members, and that's one chairman who leads the council. We have 8 ward members. There's 8 wards in DC, kind of similar to, I guess, counties in Virginia. And there's 4 at-large members, which means they represent the entire city. And DC is different because we're not a state. We're the only jurisdiction in the country that has to have our local laws approved by Congress. So once we go through the entire cycle here, it's transmitted to Congress for something called a congressional review period. And generally that's 30 days. For criminal law, it's 60 days where Congress has to be in session for 30 consecutive days or 60 consecutive days where they have the power and ability to go in, pull up our laws that we are presenting to them, make changes and things like that. So we're in a very unique position. We have no representation in Congress. We do have a member, Congresswoman Norton, but she can't vote. So we're in a very hard situation there. Sometimes Congress will pick on DC and use us to prove examples or make other political statements. So it's tough there. So the process here, you'll see a bill is introduced. It's taken to a committee that has jurisdiction over that subject matter. They can either decide to hold a hearing or not decide to hold a hearing, and that would mean that the bill would die there. If they decide to hold the hearing and move forward, it's considered by the 4-person committee. And then it's sent to the full council for 2 votes. Then it's sent to the mayor. The mayor would have the ability to veto it and send it back to the council for consideration again. And then it goes to Congress for the procedures I just described there. And the different committees that we have are listed here: Health and Human Services, Community Development, Business, Education, Finance. The general committees, it kind of mirrors how Congress does it there. So the process for lobbying for a piece of legislation, you first would start with policy selection. You would select a policy of interest to you or your client. This could be a new idea, this could be something that you'd like to amend, or even something that's already been introduced. You would pick one piece of policy legislation to focus on. Then you would identify your goals that you would like to see come out of the passage of that bill. You would draft language. This would help staffers know what to bring before their boss or council member that they would like to move forward. The DC Council has something called the Legislative Information Management System. We call it LIMS for short. And you can go there to research what bills have been introduced previously or what law may already be in existence that pertains to the policy that you selected. You also can look at that for formatting and different tips that you need to include. Every bill in DC requires a fiscal impact statement, so that means that we have to look and see what type of impact that would have on the district's budget. And also there's standard effective date language that you have to include in your draft. So I also suggest to provide this language to staffers. There are some offices that like to take the idea for themselves and draft it in a way that they think would be most efficient to get through council, but I always say just offer it there to let them know that you are invested and want to help them as much as you can. So assuming that they take your draft, they formulate a draft, and it goes to introduction before the council chairman will refer it to whichever committee is applicable for that bill. And he tends to look to see which sections of the DC code you may be amending. So if it's a criminal law or matter that you're trying to amend or influence, then that would be directed to the Committee on Judiciary, because that committee has authority over the Office of Attorney General, Department of Corrections, and agencies of that matter. And then once it's been introduced and say that the committee decides to hold a hearing, you may want to identify relevant coalition partners to help strengthen your message and help bolster all of the efforts that you're doing. So does anyone know what a coalition is? Anyone want to guess what a coalition is? Okay, oh yes.
was just thinking, I practice family law, and I know there's a coalition that will review legislation and sometimes update the statutes that address things like child support and things like that. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head of the coalition, but it's something that has to do with that.
That's awesome.
In Virginia.
So if you were introducing something that dealt with family law, most likely you would go to them to take a look at what you're trying to do.
Change the code, update, things like that.
And even bring them in maybe for any meetings or further action that you're taking. Thank you so much for that. So, for example, again, if we're working on police brutality or anything with the criminal justice system, maybe the ACLU would partner with the NAACP or the Urban League or other groups that have similar missions and goals to help strengthen their message and show to the council that, hey, there's a lot of constituents here that care about this issue, you should listen to us. So I always think it's great to brainstorm which other partners you can bring into the fold. It's also good to bring them in earlier than later. You don't want to have a situation where you've already laid out your action plan and then you're like, hey, jump on this. Bringing them in earlier so everyone can collaborate together from the beginning, I think, is more powerful. And that, it's always a good idea to schedule meetings with the coalition partners and the decision makers. I think it's first most effective to meet with your coalition so you all are on the same page. The worst thing is when you're in a meeting with a council member or the mayor or whoever, and you all are arguing about positions or points or strategy in front of that person, that you're wasting their time and it makes it seem like you all haven't taken the time to coordinate beforehand, so most likely they won't take you as seriously. So you schedule a meeting with your coalition partner, get on the same page, and then contact the council member's office to schedule that meeting. I think it's always important when you go to the meeting to have an agenda. Like I said, council members are very busy. Identify your goals, provide your language, have your one-pagers, have all the research there. If they ask you a question, be on your toes and know what to say. I think that's the most powerful thing. And I don't think I've talked about one-pagers. So one-pagers kind of break down what's in your regulation or your law into quick, digestible sound bites, bullet points, so that decision maker can see it quickly and know where they are in the position instead of having to read through tons and tons of pages or regulations about what you're trying to come across. So I think it's important to have that one pager there, and again, that's something that you would formulate with your coalition and make sure that you all agree before you hand that over. I think it's always best to leave the council member or the council office with something that they have that will remind them of you, have your contact information there. The key is just to make it easy as possible for them to rally their colleagues and make sure that it comes to a vote. You also can utilize social media to frame your message. I think right now the majority of adults, the majority of constituents, everyone looks to social media and Twitter for breaking news. You can develop a hashtag to make your message even powerful. You can do thunderclaps. You can have everyone tweet at the council members. Almost all council members are online. Blow up their offices, call them all the time, and that will force them to listen to you. And it also provides a voice when mainstream media might not be as interested in it. I tend to see that the press doesn't really come around until the bill is actually introduced or until there is a hearing. So if you make the buzz on social media, then the news will follow suit. So then you'll prepare testimony for the hearing whenever that is scheduled. You'll have to sign up with the committee clerk to be on the witness list. The council hears from anyone. You don't necessarily have to live within the district to testify. So it's very important that you get on record. Your testimony will end up being part of the committee packet that gets sent on and gets filed. So it's good that you have a written record of your position and your organization's stance on whatever law that you were pushing for. So after the testimony, like I said, it will be considered by the committee. And this is made up of a 4-person body from within the 13 members of the council. And they'll take time to look at it, make any necessary amendments that may have came out of the hearing or your advocacy or your one-on-one meetings, and then they'll vote it out of the small committee, which will go to the full council. So after it goes through the 2 rounds of votes, you'll want to monitor this. There's something called vote counting. So actually, prior to the actual vote, you'll want to call each council, utilize your contacts, and find out, hey, which way is your member thinking about voting? If they're on the line, try to schedule another meeting, try to go back in, try to see if there's anything else that you can provide that may sway them. You can pull news clips, you can bring in other people, you can bring impacted individuals. I think that is what really moves members. If they see how it affects their constituency, then they're more inclined to take a second look and actually think about where they come out on that. So you'll go through the 2 votes, and then it will go to congressional review. And like I explained before, the 30 days and the 60 days for criminal law, you can use the Legislative Information Management System, LIMS, to track this. And if you have any questions, the DC Council actually has, sorry I didn't move this on. They actually have an office that's dedicated to tracking these bills through Congress, so you can call them at any time and they can check to let you know where it is in the process. And then afterwards, kind of like I touched on with social media, you'll want to facilitate press coverage. Use your coalition partners, use their comms teams to actually get in contact with reporters who care about these issues. Again, I think the council is influenced by what they see in the media, what they see their constituencies saying, so the more attention is better. And then after the bill does pass, there may be amendments that you see become necessary after the bill is actually implemented. For the family law suggestions, say custody or whatever other issues deal with family law are hindered, there's unintentional consequence that was developed from the law, you want to go back in and move an amendment, and that will happen, go through the same process that you went through to introduce the initial bill. And after all that, you want to take time to send thank you notes to the members, even if you may not think so. It really does mean a lot that we thank them for their public service, and the staffers especially for hustling to try to get these things done. And there's the press coverage amendments and the thank you notes. And I talked really quickly. Does anyone have any questions about what I just went over on the process? Yes, sir.
One question. One thing you put on I think is really interesting is use of social media
Yes.
to help policy advocacy these days. But some groups, maybe older groups or groups with less familiar with technology, tend to be resistant to that, even though its power has been demonstrated. Do you have any strategies you use against people who are maybe hesitant to use social media to embrace that as one of their elements in their advocacy?
I would show them the stats, show them that 90+% of people are on social media, show them that the decision makers that they want to influence are there, show them how often they're tweeting, how often they're posting, show them the actual engagement. You can track the replies that they make. Just proving to them that it works. I think you can try to find something that's similar to what you all are trying to move and show that hashtag or that campaign that was pushed on that platform. Do you have a specific example that you want help with, or just in general?
Well, not an example. I think I help with some stories I've heard about people who,
Okay.
are in different parts of the country, different demographics, and they're still very suspicious of social media.
And just let them know there are privacy settings. Like, we can change it to make only certain people be able to see our tweets. You don't have to put information about yourself. There's different filters and things that you can use. You can kind of design it for what suits their needs. So you could also offer that too. Did I see another hand in the back?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was going to follow. I'm a recovering federal lobbyist.
Oh, awesome!
And to your point, I used to represent a group that I'd say 80% of my membership was above the age of 55, and they hated social media, hated the concept, didn't want to do it. And one of the things we told them was, come to a Hill event with us, meet the staffers that that are advising the members of Congress. They walked out and they couldn't believe that these were all people in their mid-20s, early 30s. And they're like, now we get why you're saying this, because we see our grandkids are using that, our kids are using that, so it makes sense that would be an advocacy tool. So that would be a way to kind of get over that hump, something I found helpful.
Thank you. And as a recovering federal lobbyist, you see any differences between the local jurisdiction and what you do on the Hill that we touched on? Same thing?
Same thing.
Okay. So I picked a bill that is kind of near and dear to my heart. I'm passionate about returning citizen affairs and criminal justice reform. So this is a bill that actually went through council when I was still working there, and it was called Ban the Fox. Can anybody guess what that is? Or do you know what it is? Yes, ma'am.
Making it illegal for employers to ask if people have been convicted of felonies or criminal offenses on the application.
Yeah, then why is that important?
If they can't ask, then they can't. They have fewer tools available to find out who's been convicted of felonies and use that to discriminate against job applicants.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything to add on that? We're going to watch a quick video about the goals of the legislation and what it will do for impact people. I think it takes a minute for it to pop up. the effective date of the law. And I think it's important to show actually who it impacts, to hear from the actual individuals who will be assisted by the new regulation. So ban the box means that employers cannot have an actual box, like she explained, asking about applicants' criminal history prior to a conditional offer of employment. So that employer has to be ready to give an offer, ready to hire that person until they can run that check or inquire about that check. There are exceptions, however, if there's a business-related issue as to why you may or may not think it would be in your best interest to have that individual work at your business, there are opportunities for you to provide that. So if someone was just released for robbing a bank a year ago and they're applying at your bank to be a teller, that may be an issue where you may not want to have that person there. So there are exceptions. It only applies to businesses with, I think, 11 or more employees. And again, you can ask when you're ready to make that offer. Get to the next slide. So very quickly, I'm just going to run through what one would do if they were moving this bill. So the original name of the bill is Fair Criminal Record Screening Act of 2014, or ban the box by short. So this is the actual introduced version of the legislation. It has the introducer's name, which Tommy Wells is in the top right-hand corner, and then the left-hand side, if the chairman decides to sponsor a bill, he's always on the top line as well. And all the other co-sponsors or co-introducers will be on the top listed. So there's always a short title here. It just provides the overview of what is actually in the legislation, and then it goes by section. There's generally a definition section that applies to the legislation, and it goes through one by one what would be in the actual DC code if passed. So this is the introduced version. I can pass it around if you're interested in seeing it closer. As it goes through the process, the committee consideration, the one and two votes through the council, there's chances for amendments or any changes. So most likely, it's not going to look the same as it looked on the day of introduction. So the goals here, like you saw in the video and like was discussed earlier, is to get people with criminal records just a fair chance at getting employment. In DC, 60,000 people have criminal records. We have a population of, I think, 660,000 people. So this is a large chunk of the constituency in the district. Each year, an estimated 8,000 persons come home after serving their sentences. And these people are sent all across the country. Again, DC, we don't have a local prison. We don't have a vote in Congress. We don't have a local prison. So our people are sent all across the country. There's some regulation, I think, that says they're supposed to be kept within 500 miles of the city, but I don't think that happens. So this makes returning citizens services harder, reentry services harder to facilitate. If someone's out in California, how can they see their family? A lot of these people come from poverty-stricken areas, low-income households, so it's very hard to stay in contact with their family and their friends, and any services here in DC that may be able to help them upon release. So when they're coming home on a bus with $75 after being away for, say, 10 years. A lot of things have changed. You know, you have to get a license again. You have to have somewhere to live. And then, like, you have to get a job. So think about all of these different things and different barriers that people have to overcome after being away from a long time. This is one simple thing that we can put in place to try to ease that burden for our residents. So we talked about the law, we talked about who it may cover. There are also additional exceptions for like child care, health care, other sensitive lines of business that may or may not be able to comply with this. But they can't ask about arrests, any criminal accusations or criminal convictions until that conditional offer is ready to be made. And the exception I mentioned earlier is called a legitimate business reason. So the employer would just have to fill out a form to justify why they couldn't consider that person after finding out about their history. And then the agency who made the video that we just watched is called the Office of Human Rights. It's in DC, and they are charged with enforcing this law. So if you or one of your clients find that you're being asked about your criminal history prior to that offer, you can submit a complaint to the agency and then they'll review it. If they're found to be in violation of the law, then they'll receive severe penalties. So it's in the best interest of companies to learn about this and make sure that they act properly. So we identified the policy, we talked about the goals, I showed you the draft language. Coalition partners for this would be the ACLU. DC has an Office of Returning Citizen Affairs, so we would definitely want to consult with them. We have a Commission on Returning Citizen Affairs that's comprised of government and different nonprofits and local constituents. There's something called the Reentry Network for Returning Citizens in DC who works on these issues. There's an Employment Justice Center and the DC Jobs Council. So the decision makers that we would have to influence, that we had to influence to get this passed, would be the chairperson of Judiciary, Judiciary Committee members, the mayor, any relevant agency heads that may have to deal with these persons, the Department of Corrections, U.S. Attorney's Office, Office of Attorney General, Office of Returning Citizen Affairs. So here is a sample one-pager that this is, I think this is from a different law. This isn't from the DC specific, but it's just a fact sheet that goes over why it's important. They have their logo at the top. I'm sure at the back or on the bottom there's their contact information. It's just a quick takeaway that legislators and staffers can use to become informed about the bill. Again, social media. These are things that we did at the ACLU. On the federal level, President Obama was thinking about doing an executive order for ban the box on that level. So we have tagging him there. We have the hashtag ban the box and the hashtag fair chance. I think it was important because both sides of the aisle were actually pushing for this. I think we worked with the Koch brothers for some promotion on it, and it's just a quick way to get the public's attention on what's going on. And then, of course, you'd have your testimony. You'd want to hit on the key points. You'd want to make sure that you bring in impacted individuals, if that's your client or someone else. The coalition partners that you work with may have more contact or more access to people who would be affected by this. So it's important, again, to bring these frontline people before the council, before the decision makers, so they can see how it's influencing them. And then once it passes, we all celebrate. We try to go to the press and get coverage on it to inform everyone about why it's important and why it will help our people. And then, of course, send thank you notes and think about potential amendments. I think there was a bill introduced this year that wanted to expand it to housing applications. Again, housing is one of the biggest barriers. I think when people come home, a lot of their friends have moved on, their family may not be in the area anymore, so finding somewhere to lay their head at night is the biggest thing. Recidivism, which means going back to prison after you've been released, happens a lot within that first 3 years that people are trying to get back on their feet. So expanding it to housing would be extremely impactful. Maybe providing tax incentives to businesses who do employ returning citizens. That may be something that would drive more employment in that area. And then expanding it to credit checks. So those are some things that we can think about in terms of amendments. Does anyone have any questions on that? So I thought it would be fun if we did a quick exercise in your packet. I think it's the second page on the right-hand side, to do a hypothetical policy, hypothetical bill that you'd want to introduce to the council. So I've outlined each step that you'll have to think about. Also in your packet is a list of committees that you may want to think about where your bill will go. So the first thing is you write down your proposed legislation, write down your goals, do a few sentences of draft text, select the committee that would have jurisdiction, think about who your coalition partners would be, draft social media posts, what you'd want to include in your testimony, and then think about any